Eternity You just heard Allegiance from Dimmu Borgir, or Dimmu Borgir, however you'd like to pronounce it, from the Death Cult Armageddon record. This is the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And today, whenever you're listening to this, we are gathered together listening to a pretty controversial record in some ways, controversial band, I guess you would say. And one of the reasons we decided to look into this is because we're joined with an esteemed guest that has been on several episodes in the past, but not really in recent years. I believe the last episode that
Pestilence.
Chris was part of was the Pestilence show.
5 years ago.
Right. Yeah. So welcome, Chris Dick. Give us your background in metal for people that maybe are new to our podcast here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me on the Requiem Metal Podcast again, guys. It's been a very long time coming. I know that we try to do this every year and it never really works out due to our schedules or whatever else happens.
And last time we did it was the final podcast ever recorded at the Godfather Mansion.
That's what you said. That's unfortunate.
I know, it is a sad story. Yeah. Family divorces and all that stuff.
But we have the pictures.
Yeah, the hot tub picture just came up as a 5-year anniversary yesterday, and that was so actually I think it was 4 years ago that you did Pestilence.
Almost half a decade.
Yeah, I know. Crazy.
Time moves by fast. As far as metal's concerned, I've been involved in heavy metal journalism, all things heavy metal, mostly Death, Black, and Doom, with Mark since our high school years. Mark and I had Requiem Magazine, which
the name's strange.
Strange. Funny where that comes from. And then I ran a magazine called Eclipse, of which Jason helped start after Requiem folded. Then Mark joined us happily for a few issues thereafter in the late 90s, early 2000s. Mm-hmm. I worked for Relapse Records. I started digitalmetal.com, which was an early kind of Metal Sucks type site or Blabbermouth type site for metal back in early 2000s with Matt Jacobson from Relapse Records. I write for Decibel. I've been writing for Decibel since 2006, so it's a good 10 years. Been writing for Decibel. Used to write for Metal Maniacs. Mm-hmm. I used to write for some other smaller publications, but that's pretty much the history, all things said.
And one of the reasons we decided to bring Chris in is because he's kind of become a Hall of Fame specialist a bit at the magazine now. If you're familiar with Decibel Magazine, they do a Hall of Fame for each Hall of Fame record, for each issue. And you've had a pretty good run the last couple years. Sure. That seems to be more of your primary focus. I mean, there's some reviews here and there and a couple of interviews and stuff like that. But how did you kind of inherit that mantle of getting so involved in all the kind of Hall of Fame stuff?
I think it kind of came from wanting to know more about the records that I liked. Mm-hmm. And Albert, the editor of Decibel, was trusted me to kind of represent the magazine when talking to artists and labels and publicists about talking to, people like Saxon, for example, who I just inducted. Dimmu Borgir, who we're talking about, I just inducted. Killing Joke, who I did a long time ago. Ministry, I mean, you name it. So it's kind of like he trusted me to become like this representative in some way about the magazine, or for the magazine, rather. And in doing so, you have to do this kind of outreach to artists. And they have no idea what the Hall of Fame is most of the time. Hey, what is it? What does the Hall of Fame mean? What does it do? How am I represented?
Do you guys mail them issues so they can see how it's kind of portrayed?
Usually send by PDF through email. Okay. So that way, usually we send them what I call the Golden 3 Hall of Fames, which is Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, Metallica, Justice for All, and Killing Joke. Those are kind of the ones we send people to let them see the dynamic between...
Is that because those three are more, I don't want to say mainstream bands, but
everyone knows who Metallica is.
Yeah.
Everyone knows who Black Sabbath is. Killing Joke kind of has more of an artist, kind of a high culture concept behind him. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why doing something like that is different from doing a Metallica. So when you approach an artist and you say, hey, we've talked to Diamond Head, we've talked to Angel Witch, we've talked to, they're not going to, someone like Saxons doesn't know who Carcass is.
Yeah.
So, but they see that you've done, say, Metallica, they know exactly who that is. When you say you've done Black Sabbath, they know exactly who that is. When you've done Motorhead, they know exactly who that is because they've toured with them. Yeah. Right? They used to have relationships with these people. So immediately it becomes apparent that they're a lot of time, a lot of the older artists in general, are, especially when they have ex-members, are very distrusting of the process because they're more concerned about the slinging shit mentality. Like it's going to become this kind of us against them thing, which most people don't want to dig up again.
Because of the ex-members. Things like
could be about royalties. It could be about, mostly it's about money. Could be about how they were treated, how they felt they were disrespected, whatever it could be. There's a lot of dynamics there and a lot of distrust. So a lot of it's convincing these people that this story or these stories that we're going to talk through with them are not a tabloid representation of the record or of the times. It's really, we want their story.
It's just oral history.
Record.
Yeah, it's just an oral history kind of thing.
It's an oral history of the record, and we really want them to kind of do the dialogue. Like, I don't do a lot of talking. I try to, if they're not very talkative, I try to get them to go through it and, remember things, but most of the time, if you ask these guys questions, they just start going off forever because they have all these memories, they have all these stories to tell. Some are really great, some are boring, some are pretty much run of the mill. We just write songs because that's what we do, kind of thing. But it's really, you have to track down all the original members.
That's one of the I guess ideas behind it is you can't, if there's any dead members, you can't do the Hall of Fame. It's just got to be all living members.
Yeah, it has to be all living members. So you can't use,
and that's why Injustice for All is. Beyond is the only thing that they can really do.
That's right.
Because of Cliff, and obviously you can't do anything with Dio anymore.
No Dio records, no Rainbow records, no other Black Sabbath with Dio records.
Yeah.
There's a lot of records like that, like Death, for example.
Yeah, no Chuck.
Chuck, unfortunately has, passed.
You guys kind of did I feel like Decibel did an issue kind of devoted to oral history.
I did that one.
Yeah.
We did an oral history. It was kind of like a dedication, almost like a pseudo Hall of Fame.
It was like everybody that had kind of been involved as a member of Death
almost
and things
everyone,
like that.
And that was kind of the idea behind it, was just to kind of get everyone involved in kind of, instead of doing a Hall of Fame for like Scream Bloody Gore or Leprosy or Human, we kind of got all the members that were around at the time that were collaborating or appearing with Chuck on record, even producer Scott Burns and even Chuck's family to appear on that one. So it's kind of like a Hall of Fame, but it wasn't really branded as such.
Yeah. Now, which ones have you had get kind of stunted because you can't get every band member? I know you've just give maybe a couple that like kind of come to mind for people that are always like maybe waiting for how come this album hasn't come out? Well,
perfect example is Judas Priest. Any Judas Priest record with Dave Holland is kind of considered no-go territory just because of the allegations against Dave.
Pedophilia stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, from an editorial perspective, Albert's fairly strong on that point.
Okay.
He's not going to allow, British Steel, Screaming for Vengeance, really critical, pivotal, influential heavy metal records not appear in the Hall of Fame for that reason.
Even though, like, we've done, say, Burzum? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, I guess I don't want to. I don't want to. But no, the murder versus pedophilia.
It's ultimately what where Albert feels strongest about, and
I'm not debating it. I agree with it. I'm not a fan of pedophilia on any level, but I get that.
So it really depends on So Judas Priest is a perfect example. A lot of people look at that and say, well, why is Iron Maiden doesn't have any more Hall of Fame records in the Hall of Fame? I mean, there's could be 10 of them.
Sure.
They're just really hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Getting them all together. Sometimes they won't agree to things. Sometimes they will. But they're just very hard to deal with. Slipknot is another one that I was pretty much on the way to do, almost completed. And then I interviewed Paul Gray before he passed, so we have that in the can. But there are a couple of members who won't interview or won't talk because they've never talked to the media before, so therefore they won't talk now. They don't want to talk because Paul had passed at that point. Joey Jordison was one of them who really had a really catastrophic interview. Not stuff I can talk about here, obviously on the podcast, but he wasn't fit for discussion.
Yeah. I know we've talked off mic before years ago.
So
about
that was one that's been stunted. And that's however people feel about Slipknot. That's one record that kind of helped the underground become.
It's pivotal. It's a gateway record. It
was a gateway for 1 million kids. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of records
for
sold.
The students I teach. Slipknot means a lot to them. Right. It doesn't mean much to us, but I got to respect that.
But I mean, they were referencing the underground when the underground really wasn't anything. It was really just underground movement. So I think in a way, Slipknot was kind of this. This catalyst for what metal's become now, which is a little bit more acceptable, which in the eyes of some is bad, and in the eyes of some it's good.
Sure.
Record labels think it's good, bands think it's good. People who think that every band is their own, like, I own and, I first listened to Enslaved when I was a teenager, therefore Enslaved is mine, that kind of mentality. It was bad for them because then they don't want to share that sentiment. Yep. So, they were a very pivotal band for that reason. They were really kind of one of the first bands to be that heavy and that commercial. And commercial being, again, a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But the Hall of Fame process is usually a pretty enjoyable process. It's, a lot of times the point that's really terrible is the transcription.
Yeah.
Where
are you paying somebody to do your transcription?
No.
You're still doing it?
No, I'm doing it all myself because a lot of these guys are from different countries.
Oh yeah,
sure.
They have very thick accents. They're referencing song titles in their native language. There's a lot of context in these discussions. So I think if I were to farm it out to India or something like that, I'd get text back that I'd have to spend just as much time correcting than I would just sitting there and editing.
Well, I remember transcribing interviews back in Eclipse days and stuff with like Isan, the accent from Isan, trying to like figure out what word did he just say there, rewinding, playing, rewinding.
I was doing it's probably been almost 20 years since I've done one of those, but it's
terrible.
It's on the micro cassette recorder.
Oh yeah,
like
I still have some micro cassettes I found with interviews, some that were untranscribed for basically Eclipse number 8 that we never did.
You should give me those because I've still got the player. We could always put those up as bonus.
That would be kind of cool.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know if we want to get off the topic of Dimmu, but
well, I want to get to Dimmu now with the Hall of Fame, and kind of I guess the debate I was kind of curious about is why this record, Death Cult Armageddon, which was put out in 2004, versus say, like to me the first Dimmu record that had like a big impact was like Enthroned Darkness Triumphant.
Yep.
But I mean, I guess I know the Progenies, which we're going to talk about that song, I'm sure a bit, was their biggest song and things like that. It's their big selling album. But why this record as opposed to like Enthroned? Was that like your decision or a band decision or editorial?
It was neither. It was no decision. It was basically I was all set up to interview all the members that appeared on it, even the Top Hat guy.
On Enthroned? Okay.
Yeah.
What is I forget Top Hat guy's name?
I believe his Norwegian name is Stian, I think.
Okay, gotcha.
So,
for those of you that don't know, pull out your Enthroned album and look through the booklet. Yeah. You'll know.
He was always affectionately known as the Top Hat guy in the media, and friends of ours. Hey, who's the guy in the top hat? Yeah. That's the first thing you notice about that.
So you guys originally tried to do.
So we tried to do this. We tried to do that record. So I had Ian, who's the drummer, helping us out, get everyone organized, and then Nagash. I was also supposed to interview Nagash, and I was supposed to we tried to work it out. Never happened. He was doing Troll at the time, and then I went to Norway to see Dimmu actually perform with Cork Orchestra, which is this huge production that the NRK put on for broadcast in Norway. And they invited a bunch of journalists from around the world to come in and do coverage on that concert. So I was supposed to interview him at that. While I was in Norway, he's in Oslo. I'm in Oslo. It makes it easy. Just go to a coffee shop and bang it out. Well, he went radio silent for like 2 months before that, and I haven't heard from him since. So even the publicist at the time, who was working all the Napalm record stuff for Troll, tried to reach out to him. He never responded. So he went totally dark. And at that point, you have to kind of say, this guy's not going to work with us, and if he's not going to work with us, therefore no Hall of Fame.
Got it.
So everyone else was all signed on. Everyone else was in agreement that this would be a good first Hall of Fame record for Dimmu. And then Nagash kind of went AWOL. And I've never heard from him
since. Was he the guitar player?
He was the bass player.
Bass player, okay.
Yeah.
Before Simon came in.
Yep,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So then we get to this record. So tell us kind of how.
Well, you have records in between, right?
Sure.
So you have
Spiritual Black
Dimensions, and you have Puritanical, both good records in and of themselves. But I think this record is where Dimmu kind of became less chaotic and more focused. There was actually songs here that were memorable. Progenies, of course, is actually the perfect example of that. It actually has like an impact, and I think as songwriters, and even they say this in the Hall of Fame, this is their best record. And most bands are not going to say a record that's from 2005 and it's 2016. That's not they're going to think the newest stuff is the best.
Sure. Yeah.
So they think this is their best record in terms of the band chemistry, the songwriting, the way it was recorded, the time spent recording it, the time spent mastering it, the level of effort they all put into it. Their memories behind this record are all positive because shortly thereafter, obviously Nick Barker left, and then they had issues with Simon, and issues with Oyvind, the keyboard player. So this was kind of the record where the band in all aspects were kind of in harmony, or disharmony, if you want to.
Yeah, Master of Disharmony.
There you go.
There's your Enthroned.
Yeah, there's my Enthroned Darkness reference. So that's why I think this record is probably the reason we wanted to do this one. Plus, everyone agreed to it. We had everyone that could be interviewed, wanted to be interviewed. Although it took us 2 years to put it together.
Wow.
So I have interviews. My first interviews with this guy, with Silenos or Sven, go back 2 years. Nick Barker goes back 2 years. Simon goes back 2 years. Oyvind goes back 2 years. So a lot of these interviews go back in history. So now they just got completed literally like 2 months ago, with Stian being the last, Shagrath being the final guy to complete his interview.
Wow. So what do you think, like, I mean, let's talk about the symphony, because I think that's one of the selling points of this record. You know what I mean? Before this, who had done anything like this? Had Entomb done their one record yet, where they did the stuff with Stockholm?
Unreal State?
Unreal State.
No,
what was that? Was that 04, 05?
That I'm not sure, but remember, the difference between this one and any other record before it is that this record was written with the orchestra in mind.
Okay.
So it wasn't where you had a record and they decided, okay, let's put an orchestra on top of it.
So it's not S&M for Metallica.
For a perfect example.
Yeah.
It's not the Kiss thing, that atrocious DVD, that Kiss Symphony, whatever it's called.
You lost me there. That Mark's the Kiss guy, maybe. I don't know.
There's a DVD that came out that was Kiss with the symphony.
Okay.
That's the same type of thing.
Was that like more like Apocalypta like type thing, where the people were doing Kiss songs symphonically?
Playing along with it. Gene Simmons and those guys with
Hey, if
orchestra.
it makes money, Gene was behind it.
I'm sorry. So either way, what the difference between that is, you had songs that were kind of made, and the orchestra put on top, or orchestra adapting to it. This album was written expressly with the orchestra in mind. So Dimmu has a full pre-production of this entire album. That before they went into Fredman to record it, they have it's a full album already ready, and they're going to release it one day as the demos. So it was all fully integrated into the music. So there wasn't like this kind of like Lego concept where you're putting stuff on top and kind of sticking it together because it could. This is all fully integrated right from the get-go. Like, they weren't just writing metal riffs and then trying to stack stuff on top of it. This was metal riff plus orchestra together.
Sure.
So that's the main difference, I think, when you talk about an orchestra with metal versus an orchestra and metal. I guess it's kind of the preposition. I guess changes the meaning.
So who wrote the orchestrated music? Was this off given to somebody, like, here's the keyboard framework and give it to
So Oyvind, the keyboard player, or Mustas, wrote most of it with Shagrath, and with Shagrath wrote a lot of the material as well. Okay. So I think they kind of had a very good relationship in terms of melding the metal and the symphonic. And then they have a third party. His name is Gauta Storas, who is...
Was he like a conductor for the Prague
He's an
orchestra?
arranger, yeah,
okay.
exactly.
Okay.
So he's a Norwegian who I met when I was in that show in Oslo, the orchestral show. And he's the one who arranges all their stuff. So the music, it's not being arranged or written by anyone else. It's being arranged and written by Dimmu, the members of Dimmu. So anything you hear on Death Cult Armageddon is all their own music. It's not like they were saying, hey, you know more about orchestra stuff. You go write the stuff, and we'll accept it or not when you come back to us.
Yeah.
Everything's fully realized, and they give it over to Gauta, and he's the one who puts it to sheet music.
Okay.
He's the one who says, okay, this transition from a musical step or a musical theory makes sense, or this one doesn't. So he's kind of giving them guidance on he's kind of like the professor, so to speak. The
so
musical
you can say
professor.
This is for like the woodwinds, this is for the brass, all that kind of...
I mean, as far as I can tell, they know what should be like a woodwind piece, what should be a brass piece, what should be like a percussion piece or flipped over, strings. I think he's the one who's really just giving them kind of like the final seal approval. Like, this is how it should look in musical notation. This is how it should flow from a theory standpoint. You do these certain things in this order in order to be correct, theoretically correct. But it's the band who's actually writing all the music themselves.
Well, I think it's fascinating too, because Dimmu has, from the moment Throne kind of came out, was one of the purveyors of symphonic black metal, which was kind of a late 90s sort of phenomenon and stuff.
Mid to late 90s, yeah.
And then when they kind of would play shows and stuff, they would come out to the orchestral music from Independence Day soundtrack. That was like one of their things. So they've always had like a cinematic quality to some of the things that they were doing. Like, did they intend this or want this when they put it together to sort of feel almost with that kind of bombacity that you hear in like a Star Wars John Williams or these sort of major kind of big sci-fi grandiose Holst-esque orchestral scores? Is that what they were kind of going for? Or Okay, so I mean, I didn't know if these guys were like classical geeks. You know what I mean? Like if they sat
I wouldn't say
around.
they're classical geeks. I think they're probably film music geeks.
Okay.
I mean, if you talk to Oyvind or Shagrath, they're heavy into soundtracks and by certain obviously composers.
Well, and when you and I lived together, we were and I don't know if it was because the symphonic black metal helped. Like it was sort of a thing that was happening in the late '90s when
right.
Chris and I were roommates, but we were way into like soundtrack music a lot.
Yeah.
That's kind of come around again too.
Yeah, it's kind of coming. So they were a film score people, basically. Is
yeah. I mean,
into.
they were into the same stuff we were probably into. The Conan soundtrack.
Yeah.
Star Wars, of course.
Vangelis.
Yeah,
how do you pronounce Vangelis? Yeah.
Yeah, Vangelis. Yeah. So they're into those types of things. The big dark kind of Wagnerian concepts.
Sure. Yeah.
Holst is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Grieg.
And now you kind of see stuff like with the zombie and with the John Carpenter like Lost Themes kind of stuff where it's got like almost like an 80s film score goblin-esque kind of thing going on.
Carpenter was like the he called all the big scores of John Williams Mickey Mouse music.
Okay. Because it's so big.
Well, that and like every single, like if you hear something, you see it on screen. Like if somebody bumps into something, you hear it in orchestration.
Oh, okay.
Like you're Mickey Mousing every little thing.
Huh.
And his was the ultimate in just being cheap, efficient.
It was just sort of there, layered in the back. It was mood music.
He scored most of his first like 4 or 5 movies in a couple days.
Sure, yeah. Well, and I think the thing you hear with like even just Dimmu before they work with the Prague Symphony Orchestra is that this is a band that has this. This album has kind of like a circusy. I mean, I wrote down Satanic Circus. Like that's kind of their kaleidoscopic. Like they want to hit you with a lot of different sort of feels and a lot of different things.
Too. They call it the Tivolian Terror.
Okay,
which I believe it's a amusement park in Denmark. So that they all went to as kids, and I could be wrong, but I think it's in Denmark. And it was kind of like a perversion of that memory as going to this theme park as kids. Like, imagine a theme park run by Lucifer or something.
Gotcha.
So that's where this kind of, you heard that in the early Arcturus stuff where you had this...
Nightwork from Diabolical Masquerade.
This kind of like carnival kind of theme song comes. It all comes, I think, from that term and that relationship to that amusement park.
That's cool.
I'm pretty sure that's where it came from.
So let's talk about, before we kind of end this first talk set, because the song we're going to come out of is Progenies, right? So why does this song work, do you think? I mean, because every time I hear this, it just sounds like, I don't want to say it sounds like one of the ultimate like kind of black metal singles. If you were going to like sit down and play somebody like a song to try and hook somebody onto black metal, you play them something like this and they're like, damn, like it floods you with things.
Right.
Why did that work for them? Why did it become this huge single? It's probably their most famous video. Like all these different elements are kind of working.
There's several movies that used it in their trailer. I mean, it immediately within like 4 notes, I think the song kind of like exactly what to expect. That big swelling dun 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 dun.
Yep.
It's not like Terminator soundtrack. The same kind of propulsive.
And the closest I had heard to something
March.
like Imperial March. The closest I had heard to this, and I don't know. We'll maybe get into this in the next talk set and get a little bit deeper into it, but I hear things like that I heard Isan trying to do on like Prometheus, the last kind of full Emperor record, that were very cinematic in scope.
Right.
But this is like the next level because, again, you have this added layer that there's a real orchestra underneath really adding weight to it and stuff. It's not just a guy doing it on keyboards or something.
Right. I mean, I think that's the main difference. I mean, the main difference between, what Ishan was doing in Emperor and in the solo stuff compared to what Dimmu did with, a 52-piece orchestra is like night and day. Yeah. I mean, one is very sort of DIY, he's very adept at doing Ishan was very adept at doing what he was doing, but he just didn't have the resources. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Nuclear Blast believed in Dimmu enough to give him enough resources to hire a 52-piece orchestra. Even though it was the B squad in the Prague Philharmonic, they were still far more advanced in terms of.
I don't think most black metal fans are going to notice the B Squad.
Yeah,
better than the high school band.
Yeah, I mean, even Ishan didn't have. I think on was it Spiritual Black Dimensions or is it Puritanical? Puritanical. There's a 14-piece orchestra, the Gothenburg Orchestra. Again, that's even more than Ishan had.
Yeah.
So you kind of, from a sonic standpoint, Ishan's not going to have that sort of sweeping orchestral, that real quality, which is what Dimmu had on Puritanical, and then of course much more so on Death Cult.
Yeah.
And as far as Death Cult's concerned, I mean, I think that we're all hitting the topic insofar as the reason why it sounds familiar is because they're doing familiar themes, right? The Imperial March, the first few notes, you know exactly what you're listening to.
Sure.
And I think that's why they're going for in that. And as far as the metal aspect of it's concerned, it's just a really well written song.
Yeah.
For black metal, you know, or just heavy metal or extreme metal, whatever.
It's very percussive. You know.
And Nick Barker's drums on that are absolutely insane. And he admitted that that's probably one of his best drum sessions he's ever had, because he was practicing day in, day out. He was the one guy that Simon was saying he was always practicing.
Gotcha.
Because at the time, Simon was living in the rehearsal space, at Dimmu's rehearsal space. So when Nick would come over from England to play, to rehearse for a tour or whatever, or to get ready for the album, he was always playing. So that's what Simon kind of observed.
And when we talk about Simon, we're talking about
for percussionists,
Yeah, Simon is ICS Vortex, or Simon Hess. How do you say his last name? Hestius?
I'll murder it. I don't know.
But he's, of course, somebody that Chris and I and Mark were acquainted from originally through Arcturus. Mm-hmm. On the La Masquerade record, and then he got involved with Borknagar,
right.
And then from there moved on to Dimmu to play bass for them, and then kind of sang on a few parts. And he has one of his two major kind of vocal performances is on Progenies.
Yeah, and I think it's a defining moment for that song too. It takes a song away from its sort of foundation, right? Mm-hmm. You have this orchestral metal foundation, and when that vocal part from Simon comes on, it's almost like a complete separation from that foundation, so it kind of makes it a little bit...
Well, it's almost what classical symphonies do, where they spotlight like a solo instrument for a second, and it like kind of just like spotlight, boom.
Yeah. But I think it's an elevated point in the song, a crescendo, if you want to call it that.
Well, and the video really amplifies that as well. It's so over the top with wind blowing everywhere.
And the lightning coming down.
Yeah.
It's almost like, the He-Man thing, where, he raises his sword and the lightning comes down and he turns and,
Yeah.
So that's sort of like the He-Man moment, or the Prince Adam moment going into He-Man of the song. As funny as that sounds, but it really, that part really is a kind of a crescendo. And then you see the rest of the song after that point kind of goes down and then repeats the same motifs afterwards. So
sure,
it's a good. it's an important part of the song, and I think it's also a part that people connect to because it's a vocal that it's a vocal melody or harmony they can identify with, which is versus the screams or the growls or the whatever Shagrath and Abath are doing.
Well, I know one of the things that prepared me for Death Cult to like kind of almost look forward to it is that somewhere after Puritanical, Brian Allen, who used to write for Eclipse Magazine with us and was a roommate of mine, he got a hold of Burn in Hell, Twisted Sister cover somewhere. And we would just sit, and you remember listening to that all the time.
It was on a B-side.
Well, it's on this. It's on the bonus track of this, but I know it was like recorded.
It was the B-side. It was the Japanese bonus track for Puritanical.
Is that where it came from? Okay. Yeah. And that was in the day where like you didn't find that stuff floating around the internet as easily as you would today, and so like it was kind of like this diamond in the rough where like, and it was all almost Simon, the whole thing. Like Simon really owned that song, and we had loved Simon from his Borknagar stuff and all that. But so I was like really like geeked to hear more kind of Simon type things,
sure.
Going.
And I think that's one thing that you'll hear if you read the Decibel Hall of Fame. They talk about that. They really wish Simon had been able to contribute more.
I know he's only on there twice, and to me, it's like that could have really made it almost
and
more.
That's probably where they were going. I think before things kind of got a bit weird between the members.
That's too bad.
The next album kind of got a bit weird from a production standpoint. So
gotcha. Is this the last Simon record or the next one?
Next one.
Next one. Okay. Yeah. So what we're going to hear in this next set of music, and we kind of come back and talk a little bit more about some of the other songs, but we've got Progenies of the Great Apocalypse, the aforementioned song we've been chatting about. Lepers Among Us. All right, Chris, help me with this. We said Vredesbeard, which means burden of wrath, and then for the world to dictate our death. So enjoy.
Battle rage on and on. Satan was there. Satan was real to him.